In the late summer of 490 BC, a small, newly self-governing city stood against the largest empire the ancient world had ever known. It had almost no allies, no standing professional army, no long record of military victory. This was Athens, and its democracy was barely 20 years old. The question that would occupy historians for the next 2,500 years is simple to ask and hard to answer. How did a smaller, less experienced force defeat a Persian invasion army on a coastal plain called Marathon? And before we answer that, we need to be honest about something. Much of what people think they know about this battle isn't verified history. It's centuries of legend layered on top of a much stranger, much more uncertain reality. Our job here isn't to repeat the story as it's usually told. It's to re-examine it, piece of evidence by piece of evidence. To understand Marathon, we have to start with the Persian Empire under King Darius I, the largest state humanity had built up to that point, stretching from the Indus Valley to the edge of Greece. Athens wasn't initially a major target of Darius's ambitions, but between 499 and 493 BC, the Greek cities of Ionia in Asia Minor rose in revolt against Persian rule, and Athens sent limited support, including ships that took part in burning the regional Persian capital, Sardis. The revolt was eventually crushed, but according to the historian Herodotus, Darius never forgot Athens's role in it, and here's something worth pausing on. Almost everything we know about this comes from Herodotus alone, writing decades after the events, not as an eyewitness, but as a collector of testimony, sometimes with a clear literary and patriotic slant. That doesn't make his account false. It means we should treat it as our best available source, not as absolute truth. In 490 BC, Darius sent a punitive expedition, not a full invasion, under commanders Datis and Artaphernes. Their mission was specific: punish Athens and Eretria for supporting the revolt, and reassert Persian authority over the region. The Persian fleet crossed the Aegean, besieged the city of Eretria on the island of Euboea, destroyed it within days, and deported its population deep into the Persian Empire. The message to Athens was unmistakable. The fleet then sailed south and landed its troops at the Bay of Marathon, about 40 kilometers northeast of Athens. This wasn't a random choice. Miltiades, one of the Athenian commanders, already knew the terrain, and the Persians likely saw it as open ground well suited to their cavalry, a significant military advantage we'll come back to. Inside Athens, the political mood was far from unified. The young democracy, founded only about 18 years earlier under Cleisthenes, was still finding its footing, split over how to deal with Persia. Some influential Athenians favored accommodation, others pushed for resistance. When word came that the Persians had landed, the Athenians chose to march out and meet the invasion rather than wait behind their walls. They sent the runner Phidippides to Sparta for help, a documented run of roughly 240 kilometers covered in a day or two, and this part is reasonably well attested in Herodotus. But Sparta, despite agreeing to help, said it couldn't move immediately because of a sacred religious festival, the Carneia, and promised to march once the moon was full. By the time Spartan troops actually reached Marathon, the battle was already over. Athens had settled the matter alone, with only a small allied force from the city of Plataea standing beside them. To grasp how much Athens was risking, it helps to understand the sheer imbalance in resources between the two sides. The Persian Empire was governed through provinces called satrapies, each ruled by a royal appointee who collected taxes and troops from dozens of peoples speaking different languages and following different faiths, from Egypt to Babylon to Asia Minor. That diversity gave Persia enormous numbers, but it also made the army less cohesive than one fighting to defend its own home soil. Athens, by contrast, was a single, comparatively small city, its economy built on farming, olive oil and pottery trade across the Mediterranean, and silver mined nearby at Laurion. the same resources that would later fund the fleet behind Athens's greater victory at Salamis. At Marathon, though, Athens had no real navy to speak of. This was almost entirely a land battle, a direct test of hoplite infantry alone, with no naval support at all. The decision-making inside the Athenian command is itself one of the murkiest parts of this story. According to Herodotus, 10 generals led the army, one from each Athenian tribe, rotating daily command, alongside the war archon Callimachus, who held the deciding vote in a tie. The account says Miltiades convinced Callimachus that they had to attack immediately rather than wait, and that several other generals voluntarily gave up their command days in his favor, deferring to his experience. But this almost frictionless picture of unified leadership makes some modern historians uneasy. It looks a lot like a simplified narrative built to glorify Miltiades after the fact, rather than an accurate account of 10 people from different tribes actually working through a real, probably messy, deliberation. The truth was very likely more complicated than the tidy version we've inherited. For several days, the two armies simply watched each other without engaging, a tense standoff that some researchers believe the Athenians used to fortify their position among the hills ringing the plain. When the battle finally came, likely in late August or September of 490 BC, something striking happened. Herodotus says the Athenians charged the Persian line at a run, not a march, across a distance of at least 8 or 9 stadia, roughly 1.5 kilometers, while wearing full, heavy hoplite armor. This detail has sparked real debate among modern scholars. Running that distance in full bronze armor is physically brutal, and some historians think Herodotus may have dramatized this for literary effect, to emphasize Athenian courage. Others argue the run was a deliberate tactic to minimize the time troops spent exposed to Persian archers. Both readings are plausible. Neither is proven beyond doubt. One of the most puzzling gaps in the whole account is the near-total absence of Persian cavalry from Herodotus's description of the fighting itself, even though cavalry was a core part of the Persian force and the open plain was ideal terrain for it. Several theories try to explain this. Perhaps the horses had already been reloaded onto ships for another maneuver when the Athenians attacked. Perhaps Herodotus, who wasn't present, simply never captured that detail accurately. This gap is a useful reminder that even our best ancient sources don't tell us everything, and that unexplained gaps in the record should stay unexplained, not get quietly filled in with confident guesses. The battle unfolded along a long line, with the Athenians, by the traditional account, deliberately strengthening both flanks while weakening their center. This is usually credited to Miltiades as a deliberate strategy, but some modern historians question whether this was really planned in advance or simply the natural result of spreading limited troops across the length of the Marathon plain. Not a stroke of tactical genius, but an improvisation. When the armies collided, the weakened Athenian center gave way under Persian pressure, while the reinforced Athenian flanks overpowered the edges of the Persian line. Then, instead of chasing down the retreating center, the two Athenian flanks wheeled inward and closed on the Persian center from behind, turning what looked like a Persian breakthrough into a trap. The battle ended in a decisive Athenian victory, and the remaining Persian forces fled toward their ships in the bay. Some ancient sources give casualty figures, around 192 Athenian dead against roughly 6,400 Persian dead.
But these numbers come from a single source writing decades after the event, and shouldn't be treated as a precise, verified count, only as a rough signal of how lopsided the victory was. What we do have archaeologically is the burial mound known as the Soros, where the Athenian dead were interred on the battlefield itself. Solid physical evidence that still stands today, and one of the strongest direct links between the historical account and the actual site. The fate of Eretria's deported population deserves its own moment here, because it illuminates something Marathon's usual retelling tends to skip. According to Herodotus, the people of Eretria weren't killed. They were deported as an entire community deep into the Persian Empire, eventually settling near Susa, one of the Persian royal capitals, where they lived on as an exiled community for generations. This is a reminder that the Persian campaign wasn't some abstract military exercise. It carried real, brutal human consequences for an entire Greek city, and Athens faced exactly the same fate if it failed at Marathon. That gives the battle genuine existential weight, without needing any later dramatic exaggeration. These men weren't fighting only for glory. They were fighting to avoid precisely what had just happened to their neighbors on Euboea days earlier. Right after the battle, Athenian commanders realized the Persian fleet might try to sail around and land near Phalerum, close to Athens itself, possibly hoping to reach the city before its victorious army could return, perhaps with help from a pro-Persian faction inside the city. So the Athenian army marched back from Marathon to Athens at speed to block any such landing, arriving in time to find the Persian fleet, on seeing Athenian troops massed on the shore, choose to withdraw and sail home without further fighting. It's this rapid march of an entire army, not the popular legend of a single runner sprinting from Marathon to announce victory and then dropping dead, that's documented in the sources closest to the event. The familiar story of a lone messenger's fatal run, the one that inspired the modern marathon race, doesn't appear in Herodotus at all in that form. It shows up centuries later in writers like Plutarch and Lucian, and most historians believe it likely grew out of a later conflation with Phidippides' earlier, well-documented run to Sparta before the battle. That distinction matters. The popular legend is one thing, the historical evidence is another. There's a religious dimension worth noting too. Before the battle, the Athenians reportedly vowed to the goddess Artemis Agritera that they would sacrifice one goat for every Persian killed if they won. And when the actual death toll turned out to be far more than the city could offer at once, Athens kept paying that debt for decades afterward, sacrificing 500 goats every year. It's a small detail, but it tells us something real. The Athenians themselves understood their victory partly as divine, deserving on not purely a matter of tactics and courage. Any modern account that explains Marathon through military logic alone is missing part of how the people who actually lived through it understood their own experience. Marathon reshaped Athens' sense of itself. The battle quickly became part of Athenian collective identity. Memorials were raised, poems were written, and the men who fought there held a special status for decades. The playwright Aeschylus, who fought in the battle himself, chose to be remembered on his grave as a marathon fighter, before being remembered as a playwright, despite his enormous literary fame. But victory brought no lasting immunity.
Miltiades later led a failed expedition against Paros, was wounded, then put on trial before the Athenian assembly, and died shortly after from his injuries. Even Athens' greatest military hero remained fully accountable to the citizens he'd served. A balance between honoring military glory and preserving democratic oversight that would define Athens for years to come. So, what do we actually know after all this? We know a smaller Athenian force, joined only by Plataea, defeated an invading Persian army at Marathon in the summer of 490 BC. And that victory is archaeologically confirmed by the burial mound that still stands there today. We know Sparta didn't arrive in time, for reasons that are reasonably well documented. What we don't know precisely is the exact size of either army, or why Persian cavalry was absent from the fighting. And we can't say with certainty whether the strengthened flanks were deliberate genius or simply a product of the terrain. And the legend of the runner who died after announcing victory, the one that gave the modern world the marathon race, isn't confirmed history. It's a legendary layer added centuries later. That's the real marathon the evidence gives us. Not a simple, heroic legend, but something truer and more complicated. One that deserves to be told as it actually happened, not as we've grown fond of remembering it.